The dust settled around Lily Ashford's boots as she stood in front of the general store window, staring at the loaves of bread she could not afford, her empty stomach grinding against her spine while her 3-year-old daughter, Rosemary, tugged weakly at her threadbare skirts. It was September of 1878 in Calistoga, California, and the autumn sun beat down mercilessly on the small town nestled in the Napa Valley, where the vineyards stretched endlessly, but offered no relief to a widow with nothing but the clothes on her back and a thin gold wedding band on her left hand. Lily had not eaten in 2 days, saving what little scraps she could find for Rosemary, whose small face had grown gaunt and pale in the weeks since they had arrived in this town with nothing but hope and desperation. Her husband, Thomas, had died 6 months earlier from pneumonia back in Sacramento, leaving her with debts she could not pay and a landlord who had shown no mercy. She had sold everything they owned just to settle what she could, then fled with Rosemary to Calistoga, where Thomas had once mentioned a distant cousin might help them. But the cousin had moved on years ago, and now Lily found herself truly alone in a world that cared little for widows and orphans. "Mama, I am hungry," Rosemary whispered, her voice barely audible above the sounds of horses and wagons rolling past on the main street. Lily knelt down, pulling her daughter close, breathing in the scent of her unwashed hair and feeling the sharp bones of her shoulders through the thin fabric of her dress. "I know, sweetheart. Mama will get you something to eat very soon." She stood and walked into the general store, the bell above the door jingling with false cheerfulness. The proprietor, Mr. Henderson, looked up from his ledger with eyes that had already grown cold to her plight. She had asked for credit twice before, and twice he had refused. "Mr. Henderson," she said, her voice steady despite the trembling in her hands, "I need to buy bread. 2 loaves, if you please." He set down his pen with deliberate slowness. "Mrs. Ashford, unless you have money today, I cannot help you. I have a business to run, not a charity house." Lily felt her daughter's hand slip into hers, tiny fingers squeezing with what little strength she had left. She looked down at her wedding ring, the simple gold band that Thomas had placed on her finger 5 years ago in a small church in Sacramento, promising to love and cherish her until death parted them. Death had come far too soon, but the ring remained, the last tangible piece of their life together. Her throat tightened as she slowly twisted the ring off her finger, feeling the resistance of knuckle and skin that had grown thinner in recent weeks. The metal felt warm in her palm as she placed it on the counter. "This ring," she said quietly, "it is real gold. Surely it is worth enough for 2 loaves of bread and perhaps some dried meat." Mr. Henderson picked up the ring, examining it with a jeweler's practiced eye. He held it to the light streaming through the window, turning it this way and that. "It is gold, true enough, but it is thin and small. I could give you 3 loaves and some jerky. That is my final offer." Every fiber in Lily's being wanted to snatch the ring back, to run from the store and find another way, any other way. But Rosemary swayed slightly beside her, and the decision was made. "I accept." She watched as Mr. Henderson pocketed the ring and gathered the bread and jerky, wrapping them in brown paper. Her hand felt naked and wrong without the weight of the band, exposed to the world as though she had betrayed Thomas's memory. But Rosemary needed to eat, and no memory, however precious, could fill a starving child's belly. They left the store and sat on the wooden boardwalk outside, and Lily tore off a piece of bread, handing it to Rosemary, who ate with desperate hunger. Lily forced herself to eat as well, knowing she needed strength if she was to find work and keep them both alive. She did not notice the man on horseback who had been watching from across the street, his dark eyes taking in the scene with quiet attention. Xavier Bennett had ridden into Calistoga that morning, leading a small herd of horses he had broken and trained on his ranch, 20 miles north. He was a tall man of 30 years, weathered by sun and hard work, with dark brown hair that curled slightly at his collar and a face that spoke of both strength and unexpected gentleness. He had come to town to sell 2 of his finest horses and to purchase supplies, but something about the woman and child on the boardwalk had caught his attention and would not let go. He had seen her enter the general store, had noticed the proud set of her shoulders despite the worn condition of her clothes. There was something in her bearing that spoke of better days, of a life that had once held more than poverty and desperation. When she emerged with the child, he had watched them eat with the particular care of people who knew hunger intimately, and his chest had tightened with a feeling he could not quite name. Xavier dismounted and tied his horse to the hitching post, then walked into the general store. Mr. Henderson looked up with a more welcoming expression than he had given Lily, recognizing a customer with actual money in his pockets. "Mr. Bennett, good to see you. Are you here to conduct business?" "I am," Xavier said, his voice a low rumble that carried the accent of someone who had spent his whole life in California. "I have 2 horses to sell, but first, I noticed you acquired a gold ring just now. I would like to purchase it." Mr. Henderson's eyes gleamed with the prospect of profit. He pulled the ring from his pocket and placed it on the counter. "A fine piece, though small. I could let it go for $15. Xavier picked up the ring, feeling its lightness, seeing the worn places on the inside where it had rested against skin for years. He thought of the woman's face as she had handed it over, the barely concealed grief in her eyes. "I will give you $10, plus take those 2 horses off your hands for a fair price. You know my animals are the best in the valley." Mr. Henderson considered, then nodded. "You drive a hard bargain, but agreed. I know a buyer in San Francisco who will pay well for Bennett horses." The transaction was completed quickly, Xavier paying in cash and pocketing the ring. He then purchased his supplies, loading them onto his pack horse, his mind working through a problem that had presented itself without invitation. He could simply approach the woman and give her back the ring, but pride was a peculiar thing, especially in the desperate. She might refuse out of shame, or worse, feel obligated to him in ways that would make her uncomfortable. No, this required a more careful approach. He finished his business in town and rode past the boardwalk where Lily and Rosemary still sat, the child now leaning against her mother's shoulder, eyes heavy with the first full belly she had known in days. Lily looked up as he passed, their eyes meeting for just a moment. Xavier touched the brim of his hat in greeting, and she nodded slightly in return, a gesture of automatic courtesy that carried the ghost of better breeding. Xavier made camp that night just outside of town, but sleep eluded him. He kept thinking of the woman's hands as she had twisted off the ring, the visible effort it had cost her. He had lost his own wife 3 years earlier in childbirth, along with the baby boy they had both wanted so desperately. The grief had nearly destroyed him, and he had thrown himself into his work with horses, building his ranch into something profitable and all-consuming. He had not looked at another woman since Sarah's death, had not imagined he ever would. But something about Lily Ashford had reached into the carefully locked chambers of his heart and rattled the doors. The next morning, he rode back into town with a plan forming in his mind. He went directly to the boarding house where he had learned Lily was staying, though staying was perhaps too generous a word. Mrs. Cooper, the boarding house owner, was known for her sharp business sense and her willingness to extend limited charity to women in desperate situations, provided they worked for their keep. He found Mrs. Cooper in her kitchen, preparing breakfast for her boarders. She was a stout woman in her 50s with gray hair pulled back in a severe bun and eyes that missed nothing. "Mrs. Cooper," he said, removing his hat as he entered. "I hope I am not intruding." "Mr. Bennett, you know you are always welcome. What brings you to my kitchen this morning?" "I am in need of someone to help at my ranch. My housekeeper, Mrs. Martinez, is getting on in years and has been asking for assistance. I need someone who can cook, clean, and help with general household tasks. I understand you have a widow staying here with a young daughter." "Lily Ashford, I believe." Mrs. Cooper's expression shifted to one of interest mixed with caution. "I do. She works for her room and board, but she is struggling. The child needs more than I can provide through charity alone. But Mr. Bennett, you must understand, Mrs. Ashford is a respectable woman. I would not see her reputation compromised." "Nor would I," Xavier said firmly. "Mrs. Martinez lives in the main house and would serve as proper chaperone. Mrs. Ashford and her daughter would have their own quarters in the guest cottage. The work is legitimate, the pay is fair, and there would be proper meals included. I am offering employment, nothing more." Mrs. Cooper studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "I will speak with her, but the decision must be hers." An hour later, Lily stood in Mrs. Cooper's parlor, trying to understand what was being offered. A job at her ranch with room and board for both her and Rosemary, and actual wages that could be saved. It seemed too good to be true, which made her immediately suspicious. "This Mr. Bennett," she said carefully. "What kind of man is he? Why would he offer such generous terms to a stranger?" Mrs. Cooper settled into her chair with a thoughtful expression. "Xavier Bennett is one of the most respected ranchers in this valley. He raises and trains horses, and he does it with more skill than any man I have known. He lost his wife 3 years ago, tragic business, and he has kept to himself since then. Mrs. Martinez has indeed been asking for help. I know this to be true. As for why he is offering this to you specifically, you would have to ask him yourself. But I will tell you this. He is a good man, honest and fair, and I have never heard a word spoken against his character." Lily's mind raced. She desperately needed work, needed security for Rosemary. But taking charity from a stranger, especially a man, felt dangerous in ways that had nothing to do with physical safety and everything to do with obligations and expectations. "I would need to meet him first," she said finally, "to discuss the terms clearly and ensure I understand what is expected." "He is waiting outside," Mrs. Cooper said. "I can bring him in if you are ready." Lily smoothed her worn skirt, pushed back a strand of honey-colored hair that had escaped from her bun, and nodded. Mrs. Cooper left the parlor and returned moments later with Xavier Bennett. He was taller than Lily had realized when she had seen him on horseback, with broad shoulders and hands that showed the calluses of hard work. But his face was kind, and his dark eyes held a gentleness that seemed at odds with his rugged appearance. He held his hat respectfully in his hands as he entered. "Mrs. Ashford," he said, his voice low and steady. "Thank you for agreeing to speak with me." "Mr. Bennett," she replied, keeping her voice formal and cool. "Mrs. Cooper tells me you have a position available." "I do. My housekeeper, Mrs. Martinez, has been with me for 15 years. She is getting older and has been asking for help with the household duties. I need someone who can assist with cooking, cleaning, laundry, and general housekeeping. In exchange, I would provide private quarters for you and your daughter in the guest cottage on my property, 3 meals a day, and wages of $20 a month." Lily's breath caught. $20 a month was more than she had dared hope for, enough to save, enough to eventually build a new life. "That is very generous, Mr. Bennett, perhaps too generous. What else would be expected of me?" He met her eyes directly, and she saw no deception there. Nothing beyond the work I have described. Mrs. Martinez lives in the main house and would be present at all times. Your quarters would be separate and private. I run a horse ranch, Mrs. Ashford, and I am gone most days working with the animals. I need my household to run smoothly, and I need someone reliable to help make that happen. Mrs. Cooper vouched for your character, and that is enough for me. She wanted to ask why he had chosen her, a complete stranger, but pride held her tongue. Instead, she said, I would need to see the cottage and meet Mrs. Martinez before I can give you an answer. Of course, would tomorrow morning be convenient? I could send a wagon to collect you and your daughter. Lily nodded slowly. Tomorrow morning would be acceptable. They made the arrangements and Xavier took his leave. After he had gone, Lily sat down heavily, her mind whirling with possibilities and fears. Mrs. Cooper brought her a cup of tea and sat across from her. You are wise to be cautious, the older woman said. But I have known Xavier Bennett for years. If he says the arrangement is as he described, then it is. He is not a man who speaks false words. That night, Lily held Rosemary close as they shared the narrow bed in their small room. Her finger still felt naked without the wedding ring, and she grieved its loss anew. But perhaps this job would be the answer she had been praying for, the way forward she had been unable to see. She would visit the ranch, assess the situation with clear eyes, and make her decision based on what was best for her daughter. The next morning dawned clear and warm, the California sun already heating the valley by the time Xavier arrived with a wagon. Lily had dressed in her best dress, which was still worn but clean, and had braided Rosemary's fine blonde hair with careful attention. The child was excited by the prospect of a wagon ride, her eyes brighter than they had been in weeks thanks to regular meals at Mrs. Cooper's table. The ride to the Bennett Ranch took nearly an hour, following a road that wound through the valley with vineyards on either side giving way to rolling hills dotted with oak trees. Xavier kept the conversation light, pointing out landmarks and asking gentle questions about Rosemary, who chattered happily about everything she saw. Lily found herself relaxing despite her intentions to remain guarded. There was something steady about Xavier Bennett, something that felt safe in a world that had proven itself dangerously unpredictable. He did not pry into her circumstances, did not ask invasive questions about her past. He simply drove the wagon with capable hands and spoke to her daughter with the kind of patience that suggested he genuinely enjoyed children. When they arrived at the ranch, Lily caught her breath at the beauty of it. The main house was a low, sprawling structure built of wood and stone, with a wide porch that wrapped around the front and sides. Trees provided shade, and a vegetable garden flourished near the kitchen entrance. Beyond the house, she could see paddocks and corrals where horses grazed and moved with fluid grace. The guest cottage sat about 50 yards from the main house, a smaller version of the same sturdy construction, with its own small porch and windows that looked out over the valley. Mrs. Martinez emerged from the main house as they pulled up, wiping her hands on her apron. She was a small, round woman with dark hair streaked with gray and a face that creased into smile lines as she approached. You must be Mrs. Ashford, she said warmly, her accent carrying the music of Spanish heritage. And this beautiful child must be Rosemary. Come, come, let me show you everything. Over the next hour, Mrs. Martinez walked Lily through the main house and the cottage, explaining the daily routines and the work that needed to be done. The cottage was charming and clean with 2 bedrooms, a small sitting room, and a wood stove for heat. The main house was larger but comfortable, clearly the home of a man who valued function over fancy decoration. Mr. Bennett, he is a good man, Mrs. Martinez said as they stood in the cottage, watching through the window as Xavier showed Rosemary how to pet one of the gentler horses. He has been alone too long since his Sarah died. This house needs life in it again, and I am not as young as I was. I would be grateful for your help if you decide to stay. Lily watched her daughter's face light up with joy as the horse nuzzled her hand, and she felt something shift in her chest. This place felt right in a way nothing had since Thomas died. It felt like possibility, like hope, like perhaps the future did not have to be only about survival. "I will take the position," she said quietly. "When would Mr. Bennett like me to start, Mrs.?" Martinez's face broke into a wide smile. "Tomorrow, if you are able. I will help you settle in, teach you everything you need to know. You and your little one will be happy here, I think." They returned to Calistoga that afternoon, and Lily spent the evening packing the few belongings she and Rosemary possessed. Mrs. Cooper helped her, offering a few items she thought might be useful. A warm blanket, some dishes, a rag doll for Rosemary that one of her previous boarders had left behind. "You are doing the right thing," Mrs. Cooper said as she folded the blanket into Lily's small trunk. "Every instinct I have tells me this is where you are meant to be." The next morning, Xavier arrived early with the wagon. He helped load Lily's trunk and the few boxes that contained everything she owned, then handed her up to the seat with careful courtesy. Rosemary bounced with excitement in Lily's lap, thrilled by the adventure of moving to a place with horses. As they drove back to the ranch, Lily allowed herself to feel something she had not felt in months: cautious optimism. Perhaps this was the fresh start she and Rosemary needed. Perhaps in this beautiful valley, working for this kind man, they could build a new life from the ashes of the old. The first weeks at the Bennett Ranch fell into a comfortable rhythm. Lily rose early each morning and helped Mrs. Martinez prepare breakfast for Xavier and the two ranch hands who worked with him. Then she would clean the main house, while Mrs. Martinez worked in the garden or prepared the midday meal. In the afternoons, Lily did laundry, mending, and helped with food preservation as the late summer harvest came in from the garden. Rosemary thrived in the ranch environment. She spent her days playing in the yard, helping Mrs. Martinez feed the chickens, and watching the horses with endless fascination. Xavier often took time in the evenings to let her visit the animals, teaching her how to approach them gently, and showing her the new foals that had been born in the spring. Lily found herself watching these interactions with a complex mix of emotions. Xavier was patient and kind with Rosemary, never seeming to tire of her endless questions. He treated the child with the same careful attention he gave to his horses, recognizing that gentleness and consistency built trust better than force ever could. And he treated Lily with unfailing respect. He never invaded her privacy, never asked for anything beyond the work they had agreed upon, and never gave her cause to feel unsafe or uncomfortable. In fact, he often seemed to go out of his way to ensure she felt valued and appreciated. When she mentioned that Rosemary needed new shoes, he rode into town the next day and returned with sturdy boots that fit perfectly. When the nights grew cooler as autumn advanced, he brought extra firewood for the cottage without being asked. One evening in early October, about 6 weeks after Lily had arrived at the ranch, Mrs. Martinez invited her to stay for dinner in the main house. It had become a weekly tradition, a time when the small household gathered around the table and shared the news of the week. Xavier told stories about the horses he was training, Mrs. Martinez shared gossip from her visits to town, and Rosemary chattered about her adventures around the ranch. After dinner, while Mrs. Martinez cleared the dishes and Rosemary played with her doll by the fireplace, Xavier asked Lily to join him on the porch. She followed him outside, wrapping her shawl around her shoulders against the cool evening air. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, looking out over the valley where the last light of sunset painted the hills in shades of gold and purple. Then, Xavier reached into his pocket and pulled out something small that gleamed in the fading light. "Mrs. Ashford," he said quietly, "I have something that belongs to you." Lily looked at what he held and her heart stopped. It was her wedding ring, the thin gold band she had traded for bread 6 weeks ago. She stared at it, unable to speak, unable to understand how this was possible. "I was in the general store the day you sold it," Xavier continued, his voice gentle. "I watched you make that trade, saw what it cost you. After you left, I bought it from Mr. Henderson. I have been waiting for the right time to return it to you." Lily's hand trembled as she reached out, then drew back. "I cannot accept this. It is too much. You have already done so much for us." "I am not giving you charity," Xavier said firmly. "I am returning something that was taken from you by circumstances beyond your control. This ring represents your past, your marriage, your history. No one should have to trade their history for survival. Please take it." Tears welled in Lily's eyes as she slowly extended her left hand. Xavier stepped closer, and with infinite gentleness, he slid the ring back onto her finger where it belonged. The metal felt warm from his pocket, familiar and right against her skin. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice breaking. "You cannot know what this means to me." "I think I can," he said quietly. "I still wear my Sarah's locket around my neck. Our memories deserve to be honored, not sold out of desperation." In that moment, something fundamental shifted between them. Lily looked up at this man who had given her employment, safety, and now the return of her most precious possession. And she saw him clearly for the first time. Not just as her employer, not just as the kind rancher who had rescued her from poverty, but as a man who understood loss, who carried his own grief, and who had somehow found room in his guarded heart to care about hers. Over the following months, as autumn gave way to winter, Lily and Xavier began to spend more time together. It started innocently enough with Xavier asking for her opinion on household matters, then progressing to longer conversations on the porch after dinner. He told her about his childhood growing up on his father's ranch, about meeting Sarah at a barn dance in Napa, about the devastating loss of both wife and child in one terrible night. Lily found herself sharing her own story. Her happy marriage to Thomas, their struggles to make ends meet in Sacramento, the horror of watching him die from pneumonia while unable to afford proper medical care, and the desperate months that followed. She told him things she had not spoken aloud to anyone, finding in his quiet attention a safety she had not known she needed. Mrs. Martinez watched the growing connection between them with pleased satisfaction. She had known Xavier since he was a boy, had worked for his family before coming to work for him, and she had prayed for years that he would find happiness again. In Lily, she saw a woman of strength and grace who had been tested by life and emerged with her kindness intact. They were well matched, these two wounded souls, if only they could find their way to each other past their grief and fear. Winter in the Napa Valley was mild compared to what Lily had known in Sacramento, but there were still cold nights and occasional frost that silvered the grass in the mornings. Christmas approached, and Mrs. Martinez insisted on decorating the house with pine boughs and candles. She enlisted Rosemary's help, and the child threw herself into the project with enthusiasm. On Christmas Eve, Xavier surprised them all by arriving home with a small pine tree that he set up in the main house. He produced decorations that had been packed away since Sarah's death, and together, they trimmed the tree while Mrs. Martinez made hot cider spiced with cinnamon. Rosemary had never had a proper Christmas before. Thomas had died shortly before the previous Christmas, and Lily had been too mired in poverty and grief to celebrate. Now, watching her daughter's face glow with wonder as she hung decorations on the tree, Lily felt her heart swell with gratitude. That night, after Rosemary had been put to bed in the cottage with visions of Christmas morning dancing in her head, Lily returned to the main house to help Mrs. Martinez with final preparations for the next day's feast. But she found the older woman shooing her toward the door. "You go sit with Mr. Bennett," Mrs. Martinez said with a knowing smile. "I have everything under control here. Go, enjoy the peace of Christmas Eve." Lily found Xavier on the porch despite the cold, looking up at the stars that blazed brilliantly in the clear winter sky. She wrapped her shawl tighter and joined him, and he immediately shrugged out of his heavy coat and draped it around her shoulders. "You will freeze," she protested, but he waved away her concern. "I am used to the cold. You are not. Please keep it." They stood together in the oversized coat, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body, and looked at the stars in comfortable silence. Then Xavier spoke, his voice low and careful. "I want to tell you something, Lily. May I call you Lily?" "Yes," she said softly. "Please do. I have been alone for 3 years, and I thought I would always be alone. I thought my heart died with Sarah and our son. But these past months, watching you with Rosemary, working alongside you, talking with you in the evenings, I have felt something come back to life that I did not think I would ever feel again." Lily's breath caught, her heart beginning to race. "I care for you," he continued, turning to face her. "I care for you deeply, and I care for Rosemary as well. I am not asking for anything, not expecting anything. I just needed you to know that you have brought light back into this house and into my life." She looked up at him, at his honest face and gentle eyes, and felt tears begin to fall. "I care for you too," she whispered. "I have tried not to. I have tried to keep my distance, to remember that I am your employee, that I am still grieving Thomas. But my heart does not seem to care about what is proper or expected. It simply knows what it feels." Xavier reached up slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, and gently wiped the tears from her cheeks with his thumbs. "We do not have to rush anything. We do not have to decide anything tonight. I just wanted you to know that if someday, when you are ready, if you ever wanted to consider a future that included more than just employment, I would be honored to court you properly." "I would like that," Lily said, her voice steady despite her tears. "When I am ready, when the time is right, I would like that very much." He smiled then, a genuine smile that transformed his usually serious face, and Lily felt something warm and hopeful bloom in her chest. They stood together under the stars, wrapped in his coat, and let the moment stretch out in gentle peace. Christmas Day was full of joy and laughter. Rosemary received a beautiful rag doll that Mrs. Martinez had secretly been sewing for weeks, a wooden horse that one of the ranch hands had carved, and a set of hair ribbons from Lily. Xavier gave Lily a warm winter coat that fit perfectly, and she gave him a set of leather-work gloves she had saved her wages to purchase. They ate a feast that Mrs. Martinez had labored over for days, and sang carols around the piano that had sat silent in the parlor since Sarah's death. That night, as Lily tucked Rosemary into bed, the child looked up at her with sleepy eyes and said, "Mama, I like it here. I like Mr. Bennett." "Is he going to be my new papa?" Lily smoothed her daughter's hair, choosing her words carefully. "Would you like that, sweetheart?" "Yes," Rosemary said with the simple certainty of childhood. "He is nice and he makes you smile. You did not smile very much before we came here." "No, I suppose I did not. Sleep now, my darling. Tomorrow we will help Mrs. Martinez with the leftover turkey." As winter gave way to spring, the relationship between Lily and Xavier deepened slowly and naturally. They took walks together in the evenings when the weather was fine, wandering through the hills around the ranch while Rosemary ran ahead chasing butterflies. They talked about everything and nothing, discovering shared opinions on some matters and delightfully different views on others. Xavier courted her with old-fashioned propriety, always mindful of her reputation and her feelings. He brought her wildflowers from the hills, books from town that he thought she might enjoy, and small treats for Rosemary. In return, she mended his clothes with care, baked his favorite pies, and listened with genuine interest to his plans for expanding the ranch. Mrs. Martinez watched it all with deep satisfaction, often remarking to the ranch hands that it was about time Mr. Bennett found happiness again. The ranch hands, two brothers named Jack and Samuel Potter who had worked for Xavier for years, agreed wholeheartedly. They had watched their boss retreat into loneliness after Sarah's death, and they were glad to see him coming back to life. In May, on a warm evening when the valley was painted gold by the setting sun, Xavier asked Lily to walk with him to a spot on the ranch he particularly loved. It was a small rise that overlooked the entire property, where wildflowers grew thick and the view stretched for miles. They stood together looking out over the land, and Xavier took her hand, his calloused fingers intertwining with hers. "Lily," he said, his voice carrying a nervous tremor she had never heard before. "I know we have not been courting for very long by traditional standards. But I am not a young man anymore, and I have learned that life is uncertain and precious. I do not want to waste the time we have been given." He turned to face her, keeping her hand clasped in his. "I love you. I love your strength and your kindness. I love the way you care for Rosemary. I love your laugh and your sharp mind and the way you hum while you work. I want to spend the rest of my life with you if you will have me. Will you marry me?" Lily felt tears of joy spring to her eyes. She had known this moment was coming, had felt it building between them for weeks. But hearing the words spoken aloud still took her breath away. "Yes," she said, her voice clear and certain. "Yes, I will marry you. I love you too, Xavier. You have given me back my life, my hope, my future. I cannot imagine spending it with anyone else." He pulled her into his arms then, holding her close, and she felt the solid reality of him, the warmth and strength that had become her anchor. When he tilted her face up and kissed her for the first time, it was gentle and sweet and full of promise. They were married in June in a small church in Calistoga, with Mrs. Martinez and the Potter brothers in attendance, along with Mrs. Cooper and a few other friends they had made in town. Rosemary served as flower girl, wearing a new dress that Mrs. Martinez had sewn especially for the occasion. She scattered rose petals down the aisle with serious concentration, then beamed with pride when Lily and Xavier exchanged their vows. As Xavier slipped a new wedding band onto Lily's finger, to rest alongside the thin gold band from her first marriage, she felt the rightness of it settle into her bones. She was not forgetting Thomas or the love they had shared. But she was choosing to live again, to love again, to build a new future with this good man who had found her at her lowest point and lifted her back up. The wedding feast was held at the ranch, with tables set up in the yard and food enough to feed everyone who had helped make their life together possible. There was music and dancing and laughter that rang out across the valley as the sun set in brilliant shades of orange and pink. That night, after Rosemary had been tucked into bed in her room in the main house, which was now truly her home, Lily and Xavier retreated to the bedroom they would now share. It was the same room Xavier had shared with Sarah, but he had asked Lily if she wanted to redecorate, to make it theirs rather than a shrine to the past. Together they had chosen new curtains and a new quilt, honoring the past while embracing the present. Xavier was gentle with her, patient and tender, understanding that while she had been married before, it had been more than a year since Thomas's death, and even longer since she had known physical intimacy. They moved together slowly, learning each other, and when they finally came together fully as husband and wife, Lily felt a sense of completion she had not known she was missing. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the big bed, and Xavier traced the outline of her face with his fingers as though memorizing her features. "I never thought I would be this happy again," he murmured. "Thank you for taking a chance on me, on us." "Thank you for buying back my ring," she replied, touching the two bands on her finger. "Thank you for seeing me when I was invisible to everyone else. Thank you for loving my daughter as your own." "She is my own now," he said firmly. "If you agree, I would like to formally adopt her, to give her my name. I want her to know she belongs here, that she is my daughter in every way that matters." Fresh tears spilled down Lily's cheeks. "Thomas would have liked you. He would have been grateful that someone like you is raising his daughter." "Yes, I agree. Let us make it official." Life at the Bennett Ranch settled into a new rhythm, one of family and belonging. Rosemary flourished under Xavier's attention, following him around the ranch whenever he allowed it, learning about horses and cattle and the business of ranching. He taught her to ride when she turned 5, setting her on the gentlest mare and leading her around the paddock while she squealed with delight. Mrs. Martinez remained with them, less as a housekeeper now and more as beloved family. She doted on Rosemary and fussed over Xavier and Lily in equal measure, declaring herself the happiest woman in California to be part of such a loving household. A year after their wedding, Lily discovered she was pregnant. The news filled her with both joy and terror, remembering what had happened to Sarah. But Xavier held her close and promised that they would get the best medical care available, that he would not lose her the way he had lost his first wife. He was true to his word, bringing a doctor from San Francisco to stay at a nearby inn when Lily's time drew near. In February of 1880, she gave birth to a healthy baby boy whom they named Thomas Xavier Bennett, honoring both the past and the present. The birth was difficult but successful, and when Xavier held his son for the first time, Lily saw tears streaming down his face. "Thank you," he whispered, looking at her with eyes full of wonder and love. "Thank you for this gift, for this second chance." Rosemary adored her baby brother, helping Lily care for him with 6-year-old enthusiasm. She sang to him and brought him toys and declared to anyone who would listen that she was the best big sister in the whole world. 2 years later, Lily gave birth to a daughter they named Sarah Rose, honoring Xavier's first wife and the roses that grew wild on the hills around the ranch. Rosemary, now 8, was even more helpful with this baby, old enough to be genuinely useful. The ranch prospered under Xavier's careful management. His horses gained a reputation throughout California for their quality and training, and buyers came from as far as Los Angeles and Sacramento to purchase Bennett stock. With the increased income, Xavier was able to expand the house, adding more bedrooms and a larger kitchen that made Mrs. Martinez weep with joy. He also set aside money in trust for all 3 children, determined that they would have opportunities he had never known, especially the girls. Education was important to both him and Lily, and they made plans to bring in a tutor when the children were old enough. On their 5th wedding anniversary, as they stood together on the rise where Xavier had proposed, watching the sunset paint the valley in familiar gold and purple, Lily reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. "You remember the day I sold my ring for bread?" she asked quietly. "I remember," Xavier said, his arm around her waist. "I remember thinking I had never seen anyone braver. I was not brave. I was desperate and terrified, Bravery and desperation often look the same, he replied. You did what you had to do to survive to protect Rosemary. That took courage. She touched the 2 rings on her finger, the thin gold band from Thomas and the wider one from Xavier. Sometimes I still cannot believe how much my life has changed. From that moment of utter despair to this, to you, to our family, to this beautiful life. It seems impossible. Nothing about love is impossible, Xavier said, pulling her closer. I found you at the exact moment we both needed to be found. I do not believe that was an accident. Nor do I, Lily agreed. I think Thomas and Sarah would be happy for us, do not you? I think they would want us to find joy again. I know they would, Xavier said firmly. Love does not diminish because we find it again with someone new. It multiplies. Our hearts are big enough to hold all of it, the past and the present, the grief and the joy. They stood together as the sun disappeared below the horizon, and the first stars began to appear. From the house below, they could hear the sounds of their children playing before bedtime, Mrs. Martinez calling them in with affectionate sternness. The life they had built together was full and rich and real, grounded in the solid foundation of mutual respect and deepening love. As they walked back to the house hand in hand, Lily thought about the woman she had been 2 years ago, standing in front of the general store with an empty stomach and a desperate heart. She thought about the moment she had twisted her wedding ring off her finger, feeling like she was betraying everything she had lost. And she thought about the cowboy who had seen her in that moment and had understood, had bought back the ring and returned it to her, had given her not just charity but dignity, not just a job but a future. The years continued to pass in a rhythm of seasons and celebrations. Rosemary grew into a thoughtful young woman with her mother's grace, and a natural way with horses that reminded Xavier of his own youth. She spent hours in the stables and paddocks, learning everything her father could teach her about training and breeding. Xavier treated her exactly the same as he treated young Thomas, never suggesting that her gender should limit her involvement in the ranch. Thomas, as he grew, showed more interest in the business side of ranching, often accompanying Xavier to meetings with buyers and asking endless questions about pricing and negotiations. He was a serious child, thoughtful like his namesake, but with flashes of humor that delighted everyone. Little Sarah Rose was the wild one, fearless and bright, climbing trees and catching frogs with equal enthusiasm. She wrapped Xavier around her small finger with ease, and he could rarely deny her anything. Lily often teased him about spoiling their youngest daughter, but she too found it hard to resist Sarah's infectious joy. Mrs. Martinez grew older but remained a vital part of the household, now aided by 2 younger women from town who came to help with the heavier work. She spent her days supervising the kitchen, spoiling the children, and offering wisdom to Lily about marriage and motherhood. When she finally passed away peacefully in her sleep at the age of 72, the entire Bennett family mourned her as the beloved matriarch she had been. The ranch continued to expand and prosper. Xavier purchased additional land, increasing their holdings to over 1,000 acres. He built a better barn and improved the breeding program, producing horses that were sought after throughout California and beyond. The financial security this provided meant that Lily never again had to worry about hunger or poverty, that her children would never know the desperation she had once faced. But more important than the financial success was the love that filled their home. Xavier never took Lily for granted, never forgot the gift they had been given in finding each other. He still brought her wildflowers from the hills, still sought her counsel on important decisions, still looked at her across the dinner table with eyes full of wonder that she was his. And Lily never forgot what Xavier had done for her, how he had seen her worth when she felt worthless, how he had returned her ring and her dignity, how he had chosen to love not just her but her daughter as well. She made sure he knew, through words and actions, how deeply she appreciated and loved him. On a spring evening in 1889, when Rosemary was 16 and preparing to attend a women's college in San Francisco that accepted female students interested in veterinary studies, the family gathered on the porch for their evening ritual of watching the sunset. It was something they had done for years, a time of togetherness before the day ended. Rosemary sat on the porch railing, long legs dangling, talking excitedly about her upcoming adventure. Thomas, now 10, sat at Xavier's feet, leaning against his father's legs. Sarah Rose, 8 years old and still as wild as ever, was curled up in Lily's lap despite being nearly too big for it. "Papa," Rosemary said, using the name she had called Xavier since he had officially adopted her when she was 5. "I want to thank you for supporting my education. I know not many fathers would allow their daughters to pursue such studies." Xavier smiled at his eldest daughter, his first daughter of the heart if not of blood. "Your mind is as sharp as anyone's, Rosemary. It would be a waste not to use it fully. Besides, this ranch will need a skilled veterinarian someday." "Who better than you, Mama?" Thomas said, looking up at Lily. "Tell us again about how you and Papa met." It was a story they had heard many times, but they never tired of it. Lily exchanged a glance with Xavier, seeing the same memories reflected in his eyes. "Well," she began, "it was September of 1878, and I was new to Calistoga. Your sister and I had nothing but the clothes on our backs and hope that seemed very thin. I stood in front of the general store, looking at bread I could not afford, and I made the hardest decision of my life." She held up her left hand, where the 2 wedding rings still rested. "I traded my wedding ring, the one your first father had given me, for food to keep us alive. I thought I had lost it forever, lost that piece of my past and my memories. But your papa, who I had not even met yet, was in town that day." Xavier picked up the story. "I saw you make that trade, saw what it cost you. After you left, I bought the ring from Mr. Henderson. Then I found a way to offer you honest work, so that you would never have to trade your memories for survival again. And then he gave you back the ring," Sarah Rose said, her voice drowsy but engaged. "Yes," Lily said softly. "Several weeks after I came to work here, he gave me back my ring. He slipped it onto my finger himself, and in that moment I began to understand what kind of man he was. The kind of man who understands that our past matters, that our memories deserve to be honored." "And then you fell in love," Rosemary said with a smile. "And then we fell in love," Xavier confirmed. "Though truthfully, I think I started falling in love the moment I saw you standing on that boardwalk, feeding your daughter with such care even though you were starving yourself." "I fell in love with you when you returned my ring," Lily said, looking at him with eyes still full of love after all these years. "That was the moment I knew you saw me, really saw me, not just as someone to save but as a person with a story that mattered." They sat together as the sun set, the family they had built together, the life they had created from desperation and hope and unexpected love. The ranch spread out around them, prosperous and beautiful, but the real wealth was in this moment, in the connections that bound them together. Later that night, after the children were in bed, Lily and Xavier stood in their bedroom, preparing for sleep. She was brushing her hair at her dressing table and he came up behind her, meeting her eyes in the mirror. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked quietly. "Marrying me, tying your life to mine." She set down the brush and turned to face him, taking his hands in hers. "Never, not for a single moment. You gave me back my life, Xavier. You gave me love and family and security. You gave Rosemary a father who adores her. You gave me Thomas and Sarah. You gave me this beautiful life. How could I ever regret any of it? I am the one who should be grateful," he said, pulling her close. "You brought light back into my darkness. You filled this house with laughter and love again. You gave me a second chance at fatherhood, at happiness, at life itself." They held each other in the quiet of their bedroom, two people who had known loss and found each other in the aftermath. The thin gold band from her first marriage and the wider band from her second rested together on her finger, symbols of a life fully lived, of love that endures through heartbreak and finds new expression in unexpected places. The years continued their steady march. Rosemary graduated from college with honors and returned to the ranch to work alongside her father, becoming one of the few female veterinarians in California. She eventually married a kind young man from Napa, a doctor who respected her education and career, and they built a house on Bennett land, staying close to family. Thomas took over more and more of the ranch's business operations as Xavier grew older, showing the same careful attention to detail and fair dealing that his father had demonstrated. He married a teacher from town, and they gave Lily and Xavier their first grandchildren. Sarah Rose proved to be the most adventurous of the three, eventually moving to San Francisco to become a journalist, writing about social issues and women's rights. But she returned home often, always finding her way back to the ranch that had nurtured her wild spirit. Xavier and Lily grew old together, their hair turning gray, their steps slowing, but their love never diminishing. They still took walks in the evenings when weather and health permitted, still watched the sunsets from their favorite spot on the rise, still held hands like newlyweds. On their 25th wedding anniversary, their children threw them a celebration at the ranch. Friends and family came from all over California to honor them, to celebrate the love story that had begun with a desperate woman trading her wedding ring for bread and a cowboy who had seen her worth. During the celebration, Xavier gave a toast that brought tears to everyone's eyes. 25 years ago, he said, his voice still strong despite his 65 years, I watched a woman make an impossible choice to protect her child. I saw courage and love in that moment, and I knew I had to know her. Lily, you have made every day of these 25 years a gift. You have filled my life with more joy than I thought possible after losing Sarah. You have given me children who make me proud every single day. You have been my partner, my love, my best friend. Here is to 25 more years if God is willing. Lily stood beside him, her hand in his, the two wedding rings still resting on her finger. You bought back more than my ring that day, she said softly. You bought back my hope, my future, my faith in goodness. Everything I am, everything we have built together, started with that single act of kindness. I love you, Xavier Bennett, more today than yesterday, but not as much as tomorrow. They kissed to the applause and cheers of their family and friends, two people who had found each other in the aftermath of tragedy and built something beautiful and lasting. Xavier lived to see his 75th birthday, still active in the ranch though Thomas had taken over most of the daily operations. On a warm evening in June of 1899, he and Lily sat on the porch watching yet another sunset, surrounded by children and grandchildren. He held Lily's hand, his grip still strong despite his age. You remember the first sunset we watched together? He asked. Of course, she said. It was Christmas Eve, the year I came to work for you. You told me you cared for me, that you wanted to court me when I was ready. Best decision I ever made, he murmured. Well, second best. The first best was buying back your ring, she laughed softly. That ring changed my life, such a small thing, but it meant everything. Not the ring, he corrected gently. The woman who wore it. You changed my life, Lily. You and Rosemary, walking into my world and making it bright again." That night, Xavier passed away peacefully in his sleep, Lily at his side. He simply did not wake up the next morning, his long life coming to a gentle close. The entire valley mourned him, hundreds attending his funeral to pay respects to a man who had been fair, kind, and deeply loved. Lily grieved, but it was a different kind of grief than she had known when Thomas died. She had been given 25 years with Xavier, years full of love and family and joy. She had no regrets, no unfinished business. She had loved fully and been fully loved in return. She remained active in the ranch's operations, working alongside Thomas and Rosemary, enjoying her grandchildren, and watching her family continue to grow. Sarah Rose eventually married a fellow journalist and gave Lily 2 more grandchildren to spoil. On quiet evenings, Lily would still walk up to the rise where Xavier had proposed, where they had watched so many sunsets together. She would stand there alone but not lonely, feeling his presence in the wind that rustled through the wildflowers, in the beauty of the land they had built together. She never removed either of her wedding rings. The thin gold band from Thomas and the wider one from Xavier rested together on her finger, symbols of 2 great loves, 2 chances at happiness. Both men had given her everything they had loved her with their whole hearts, and she had been blessed beyond measure to have known both of them. When Lily passed away in 1910 at the age of 64, surrounded by her children and grandchildren, her last words were of gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Thank you for the bread that brought me Xavier. Thank you for the cowboy who bought back my ring. Thank you for this beautiful, unexpected life." She was buried next to Xavier on a hill overlooking the ranch, the land they had built together, the legacy they had created. On her headstone, along with her name and dates, were carved the words, "She traded her ring for bread. He placed it back on her finger. Together they built a life of love." The Bennett Ranch continued through the generations, passed down through Thomas and his children, with Rosemary's veterinary practice remaining an integral part of its success. Sarah Rose's children eventually returned from San Francisco to help run the family business, finding that the pull of the land was too strong to resist. The story of how Lily and Xavier met became family legend, told and retold to each new generation. The 2 wedding rings were preserved as family heirlooms, symbols of a love story that had started with desperation and transformed into something beautiful and lasting. In the summer of 1920, Rosemary Bennett Fletcher, now a grandmother herself at 58, stood on the same rise where her parents had spent so many evenings. Her own children and grandchildren were gathered at the main house for a family celebration, their voices carrying on the warm air. She looked out over the valley, over the ranch that Xavier had built and that her family continued to maintain, and she thought about the journey that had brought them all here. If her mother had not been desperate enough to trade her ring for bread, if Xavier had not been in town that day to see it happen, if he had not had the kindness to buy it back and the wisdom to return it, none of this would exist. The ranch would not exist. She would not exist as she was, shaped by Xavier's love and guidance. Her siblings would not exist. The dozens of grandchildren and great-grandchildren would not exist. All of it, every bit of this beautiful, complex family legacy had started with one act of desperate survival and one act of compassionate kindness. "Thank you, Papa," she whispered to the wind. "Thank you, Mama. Thank you for showing us what love looks like, what family means, what it means to see someone truly and choose to help them not out of pity, but out of recognition of their worth." As the sun set over the valley in familiar shades of gold and purple, Rosemary walked back down the hill to join her family. The Bennett ranch would continue, the legacy of Lily and Xavier living on in the lives they had touched, the children they had raised, the love they had shown to each other and to the world. In the end, it was not the land or the horses or the financial success that mattered most. It was the love story at the heart of it all, the cowboy who had bought back a wedding ring and placed it on a woman's finger, symbolizing not just the return of her past but the promise of her future. It was the family they had built together, the values they had instilled, the example they had set. Their love had started in the Wild West town of Calistoga, California, in September of 1878, when a desperate widow traded her wedding ring for bread, and a lonely cowboy saw her worth. It had grown through courtship and marriage, through children and grandchildren, through sunsets and ordinary days made extraordinary by being lived together. And it lived on still, in the hearts and lives of everyone they had touched, a legacy far more valuable than gold, far more enduring than any monument of stone. The Bennett family continued to thrive, generation after generation, always remembering the story of their beginning, always honoring the love that had made it all possible. And on quiet evenings, when the California sun painted the valley gold and purple, family members would sometimes walk up to the rise and stand where Lily and Xavier had stood, feeling the connection to the past and the hope for the future, understanding that the greatest treasures in life are not things but people, not possessions but love freely given and gratefully received.